Okay, we're on. So I think that's going to be recording. I've been thinking about some things, as always, and so I'm sort of thinking it through myself. We say that God is love, or we read about it, but I don't think that many of us, I don't think any of us, really start out our lives with God as love. It's not the way we're taught, and it's not the way we are constituted. We have to start out as getting a sense of self, kind of a separate self. Okay, we've heard that. So you develop an ego, you develop a sense of me, not you, and me as how I'm different or unique in a healthy way, so we can grow up to be all that God made this individual person to be, and so on and so forth. So we have this sense. And I think when we get introduced to religion, it appeals to certain parts of ourselves that need that appeal throughout our lives. So I'll take myself, for instance. So I was brought up and I was introduced to Catholic Christianity. I wasn't introduced to Judaism. I wasn't introduced to Lutheranism nor Buddhism. My introduction, my upbringing, and my explanation of the spiritual life and God and soul and so on, just the word soul, all those kinds of things, was a Catholic way of looking at things. And what it appeals to is it appealed to me as a feeling person. I feel comfortable. I even say this today. I feel very comfortable in a Catholic setting. I feel very comfortable with Eucharist, sacraments, the rituals, and so there's a certain comfort level. Then there's a certain appeal to my mind. The mind always has to have a God appeal to it, as well as a God feeling to it. We're body, we're mind. So the catechism, for instance, and the explanations, and the theology, if you will, the study of God, that all appeals to that part of me. So then I get very comfortable, a whole part of me gets very comfortable, but there's more. And that's what I think is the development of the more mystical dimension of our spiritual life, including Catholicism. I mean, Jesus was a Jew. He was never not a Jew, if you will. He was comfortable being a Jew. But he was also, at some point, very comfortable with lots of people who were not like him in the things that I talked about. Feelings, mind, mentally seeing things. He was very comfortable with all kinds of different people. And as it says in John's Gospel, which was the last Gospel written, the first three Gospels were written a lot about Jesus. They're appealing to all that parts of ourselves I just talked about, the mental, the emotional, the physical, the thinking, the mind. But at some point in John's last Gospel, he says, God is love. And what he might have been seeing is this kind of battle going on over what's right. Now let me go back a little. It's important that we feel comfortable about a sense of what's right, because that's the way the mind works. And that's the way we feel comfortable, a sense of what's right. I mean, we wouldn't go out and really talk about, I wouldn't go out and talk about Catholicism unless I felt that it was right, if you will, that it could appeal to many people. But then you move on to this dimension of God as love. It is part and parcel, if you will, of the way you've been brought up, but it extends it It's connected to it, but goes beyond just that. Because if you stay too stuck in what's right, we'll end up killing one another. And we'll end up judging one another. In other words, God's going to get you because you're not a Roman Catholic, you're a Lutheran. That's when all the great appeal of Catholicism for me would begin to break down. So, for instance, yesterday started the week of prayer for Christian unity. Aren't we supposed to go out and evangelize everybody and make them Catholic? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? I think what we're supposed to do is be the best that God made us to be, which includes our stance, whether it's Catholic, Lutheran, Buddhist, Jewish, whatever it is, Native American Indian. That's our stance. But we reach out trying to connect to other people to see where there are connections, such as God is love would be the big connector. So that we don't, A, kill one another, B, so that we work for a better world together, even though we, from our emotional and mental stances, we have some differences, maybe some profound differences, but not so profound that we can't work together. So the mystic is always the one who makes the connection and is often misunderstood. He or she would be called, oh, all religion is the same. You're relational. No, all religion is not the same. That's absurd. All religion is not the same. We're not the same. And yet, we are one. But you can't come to that intellectually, and you won't come to it emotionally. You'll come to it contemplatively. And so contemplation really is about, for a moment, a half hour or 20 minutes or whatever. Centering prayer would be an example of this, but it's just one example. I'll look at others as we're talking here in contemplative gaze. For a while, we let be our thoughts and our images of God. And we allow ourselves just to be in a prayer in which God does all the work. I think if you have the Magnificat, and you're looking at today's reflection, it's by Ruth Burroughs. Prayer is what God does, not what you do. But we're brought up to think prayer is what I do. I ask God for stuff. I talk to God. I have an image of God. And that all has a place. And it will have a place to the day you die. But it is not the total place. It's not the total relationship. The relationship deepens through the contemplative prayer in which, for a little bit, we let go of our thoughts, our ideas, our rightness, our everything. You don't contemplate as a Catholic or a Lutheran or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Zoroastrian or an Islamic believer. You contemplate as a child of God. And at some point, some place, maybe what arises is what John's trying to talk about. I am in you, you are in me, we are in one another. And it's not just referring to people who agree with my belief system or my emotional system. So I can go on very comfortably being a Roman Catholic, especially in this week of Christian unity, very comfortably, and talk about the rightness of it. But if I'm a contemplative and I can connect with God as love, I will relate to you as a different person, differently than if I have to be right. So when religion, and early on you can get this way, religion can be fear-based. I have to find the truth to make me feel right, because right makes me feel comfortable makes me feel I'm going to heaven. That's what I want to be sure of. The afterlife. Jesus talked about the kingdom is within, the kingdom is in your midst, the kingdom is now. And it's not that we don't believe resurrection has any place or there's not an afterlife. It's just that he keeps bringing us back ever so subtly, or sometimes hits us over the head with its now. Be transformed in this life so that you begin to relate to other people as Christ related to other people. So that what you often find is people who say, I've got the right faith, I'm going to heaven, I'm right, you're wrong, and they're mean, nasty people. They're not transformed. So the proof's in the pudding. How do you act to people who are not like you? Becomes the question. So in the week of prayer for Christian unity, hopefully there are groups getting together, popes getting together with people. And it's not as if he's going to become a Lutheran or a Methodist, or they're going to become Roman Catholics. It's about making sure we don't kill one another. And it's about making sure that we're all on the same page in terms of Christ's presence in the world in very practical circumstances of the everyday life. So I try to keep that in mind, because some people think when you talk about contemplation and letting go of your images of God and your thoughts about God, that their religion doesn't make any sense. Well, Thomas Keating was a Roman Catholic all his life. He went to Mass, did the daily Eucharist, was an ordained priest. He didn't have any problem with Roman Catholicism. But why did so many people love him who had nothing to do with the Roman Catholic Church? Because it's the way Keating acted towards them and the way that he believed and accepted what they felt was truth. And together, they became better individual people by dialoguing and talking to one another. There was a Jewish rabbi living here in town, and he and Keating were very good friends. But some Jews in Boulder thought that this particular rabbi was weird, because he wasn't right in the middle of it saying, we're right and everybody else is wrong. He wasn't defending. But he was still a rabbi and he was still a Jew. But he was trying to become all God wants him to be, which is a certain way of connecting with other people. So if you're sitting here saying, I can't get an image, I can't get that in my head. It's not in your head. It's not supposed to be in your head. What's in your head is Roman Catholicism if you're a Catholic. That's what's in your head. That's what's in your heart. But once you connect, it'll happen through contemplative prayer. You'll make that connection someday, and then the light will go on. And you'll realize how to be a Roman Catholic and yet see the light of Christ in everyone around you. Be comfortable with their religions, not feel that you have to convert them or anything like that, but you're very comfortable. And you don't feel it's all relativism. That's all a head trip. So I think that's what we try to do here, is to expand Roman Catholicism to be, well, for me, that's what I do. I'm not trying to make you all Roman Catholics. But what I try to do is expand whatever you are, whatever your stance is, so that you can grow in it and through it to become all God means you to be, which is transformed. And then the relationality will not be one religion to another, but one person to another. So I think this becomes important. I think it's crucial. I think it was what Keating was all about. So when I talk about the sacred gaze, I mean, God is looking upon each one of us. He's looking upon that Muslim, if you will, that you've got a certain idea about. He's looking on that Muslim with a sacred gaze. But is the Muslim able to ascertain that? Not if he stays in his head or her head. Not if it's all about feelings. Because as Ruth Burrows says in today's Magnificat reflection, it's not all about feelings. The contemplative dimension is not about feelings. You may not feel it. Well, what happens? You change. You begin to live differently with other people. You begin to see things. And yet the prayer could be in darkness. That is, the light of Christ coming into the darkness. Your experience is of darkness. But then when you get up and enter into the world that day, you change. Some people would use as a simple phrase as live and let live. In other words, that's very much in the recovery programs. You go into any of the AA rooms where they're having meetings, and often on the wall, live and let live. No, it's not going the way you want, but that's just the way you want. Let things be. Be kind and loving and so on and so forth. And so you begin to change. But as Ruth Burrows says, you may not feel something. In Roman Catholicism, I'll just stay with my own because it's what I know, I get good feelings in church. The question is that all there is? For a lot of people, they say, yeah, I'll take that. And I said, no, God wants a deeper transformation. First of all, God wants a deeper relationship. The sacred gaze in which God is looking at you in the darkness, and you are looking into the darkness, that's in contemplation. You're actually looking upon God, if you will, trying to use a sensory device. You're looking upon God, but your sense is you're seeing nothing. So you don't pay attention to what's going on in the prayer. You don't judge it. Sometimes it could be full of light. You don't know. And you don't care because God's doing all the work. When I go to worship, I do a lot of the work. You do a lot of the work. Contemplative prayer is you don't do the work and you don't judge it. People come out of Mass and that was a good homily, that was a bad homily. That's a judgment. You're having a sense it's this, not that. Contemplative prayer, you don't care. All you're doing is opening yourself so you don't get in the way of what God would like to do. So keep that in mind. A way to, you look at yourself in the mirror in the morning, let's say. I mean, especially I had all this surgery on my face and all, and I look at myself in the mirror and say, oh God. Well, that's a swear. I should have just said, OMG. OMG. What a mess. But, so that's a judgment. Looking upon myself. It's sensory, it's intellectual, it has a certain truth to it. I was all scarred up. But then the contemplative would look at that same face and say, this is the face of Christ. And wouldn't just say it intellectually, but would have a something about it that energizes me to go into the day in a certain fashion that is more loving than someone who's worried about his face. God is like the mirror, if you will, and you gaze into the mirror of God and you see Christ in you. It's one. And you see it as love. God, it's love. God is love. And one of the first places it'll come is seeing yourself as love. Broken, yes. Unfinished is another way of looking at ourselves. We're broken by past things that we've done, but we're also unfinished, which is another way of looking at this contemplative dimension. No religion simply from an intellectual, I should pull the table closer, from an intellectual, yeah, my hands are full, thank you. That's good. From an intellectual, emotional, thinking, dogmatic place, you're still unfinished. You're still unfinished, which I think helps us to see what Jesus is talking about. It doesn't mean you haven't started, it just means you're unfinished. So, contemplative dimension is to bring us more towards finished, which of course will not be complete until after we die. In my tradition, the afterlife. But it begins here. And the purgatory here, begins here, is, and may all be here for all I know, but the purgatory is working on that brokenness and that unfinishedness, the repentance of the brokenness, the way we've either broken ourselves by the way we treated ourselves or broken relationships with others, which also affects us. So, for a Christian, as in this week of prayer for Christian unity, the contemplative dimension is very important. And what we're looking to have is to see the face in Christ in one another. It's not about the gratification of our egos when it gazes upon itself. To feel you have to be right and the other person therefore has to be wrong, and whatever you're on could be about your ego and about fear. What if I'm not right? Why am I wasting my time? That sort of thing. And so when we end up in just holding on to, if the basis of our intellectual and emotional sense of our religion brings me to make judgments about other people and judgments about other people's behavior. Why do I do that? Why do I obsess with and judge the behavior of other people? And I begin to ask myself that question because I would be bothered by the behavior of another person. Obviously, they're not acting like I think they should, or they're not acting like me. And the person right next to me has no problem with their behavior. They might say, no, I don't approve of it, but I'm not getting all worked up over it. I say, well, what are you doing differently than I am? Why are you so relaxed about it? Sometimes, there is a certain sense, yes, this is objectively bad behavior, but a lot of times, when you get away from the contemplative dimension of your prayer life, a lot of this judgment of others is a vaulted self-importance, which can have fear behind it, or a wounded self. What would be a wounded self? I'm afraid I don't fit in. So one person says, I've had a lifelong problem. I just don't fit in. Well, one thing you do is just kill yourself. I don't fit in. And certain people have chosen that as a solution. It's becoming a thing with a lot of younger people especially. That's the solution to pain and misery. But another one then is to say, there's something the matter with you. I don't fit in because I'm different than you. And you're screwed up. You're weird. You're narrow. I'm broad. I'm better. I'm evolved. So you know that someone who says they're on a contemplative path and just looks down their nose at someone who's not, someone who's merely a self-centered Catholic, saying their Hail Marys and Our Fathers, whereas I am a contemplative, that person is not transformed. I will tell you that from experience. So that's not what it's about. It's more about acceptance, in this case, of differences. feeling comfortable in your own skin and accepting differences. And accepting that God loves all people because God's love. It's an action. When the term that John used, John went into verbs. He went into action. Did John not believe in real presence? That wasn't the issue. That had been talked about. That was in the scripture. This is my body. This is my blood. And then we started killing people over that in the Reformation. That tells you something's the matter with the stance of being right. John was concerned not about the whatness, but what's it doing to you. And so his supper scene had Jesus washing feet. It's action. God is love is a verb. It's action. So you can drop images for a moment of separate God, at least, and after a while, eventually you just drop this sense of God's here but not there. And you say, well, I can't get a sense of that. No, because it's not supposed to be in your mind. It's something deeper than that. And when you get there, you'll catch it. You'll say, oh, okay, this is fine. I can still be this and see things that way. Because we're layered. We're layered in our spiritual and physical development. Francis of Assisi, for instance, Francis of Assisi was Christian. And he saw Christ in everyone. Yeah, he might have seen Christ in everything, too. And everybody thinks, wow, he's a wonderful person. So it can happen. But he had to be sort of struck at some point, and it happened pretty young in his life. Something happened to him to move him from where I am Francis, well, I forget what his name is, De Bono or something like that. He's Italian. And you are a leper. You are other and different than me. I do not touch you. And then something happened to Francis. You could call it a sudden enlightenment if you want. Something happened to Francis one day that moved him to completely change the way he is and saw and was with other people. And he tried to have his Franciscan followers be just like that. What happened when he died? They couldn't do it. They started drifting back into the mind, which is, of course, part of our religion. But Francis was trying to make that next step for them. The Franciscans still have it, that sense of love for the poor. But he had no interest in education. They went to universities. It wasn't as it's a bad thing. It just wasn't a Francis vision. So all founders are founders. And then after they die, their groups that they found become what they're going to become. And hopefully they keep looking back on the source. What was he saying? What was she saying? What did they want? What was their vision? What was their insight that formed us in the first place? And John, in his gospel, is trying to say the insight is God is love. And we're all one. But you're not going to get there through your mind. Or you're not going to get there through your emotions. You're going to get there through the contemplative dimension of the gospel. Contemplative dimension of the gospel is what Thomas Keating talks about. So, what happens when we are still unfinished, if you will, or somewhat broken, is original sin. Now, here's a way of looking at original sin. Repeat what we hate to do. It takes original sin out of a catechetical place where it doesn't affect me in the here and now. I mean, so you can take the catechism and it makes sense of it and explains it, so on and so forth, Adam and Eve, and blah, blah, blah. And then I say, and what's that got to do with your life now? How's that changing you? But when you bring it to, I keep repeating what I don't want to do. Now, I know that from listening to confessions. People go to confession, they confess, they go home, they come back. You think we don't know your voice or something like that. Forget it. So, here she is again. Oh, I'll tell you what your sins are, lady. Save you a lot of time, right? So, now you'll stop going to me. But don't worry, you're not going to be in a blog. Unless I'm having a really bad day. So we repeat what we don't like to do. It's not that you're a bad person. This is the human condition. That's why they call it original sin. We repeat what we don't want to do. We go to confession. We go to communion. We have sacraments. We repeat what we don't want to do. We say, what's going on here? What I'm suggesting is what's going on here is an unfinished person. Not that the sacraments don't work. You'd be a lot worse without them, in my tradition. But you're not going to be finished that way. There's more. There's getting to that God is love. We keep repeating what we hate to do. Now, we might, in fact, not hate the action in the moment that we take it. But we know that we don't feel right. This is how God keeps working on us, okay? And keeps inviting us to go deeper, to keep searching, is we do something and we're so sure that we're correct. We correct somebody else. We argue vehemently with somebody else. We tell them, this is what's the matter with you. And if you would be differently, or then why do you treat me this way? And so on and so forth. And then later we feel sort of righteous about it. God's working on us. Later we feel certain shame or guilt. Or we may not name it shame and guilt. We might say, why did I do that? Did that change the situation? Did that other person change one iota? No, they didn't agree with me. It's worse than it was before. That's the original sin. We don't feel so good about being right. And then we start thinking, I wonder if I am right. And as you enter into this deeper prayer of meditation, you'll start challenging yourself. And then eventually, you'll just let things be, and you'll try to live in a fashion that connects with the person that you thought was weird, wrong, odd. And it's amazing how people begin to change when they are with a loving person. And maybe a loving person with whom they used to argue. That's not the same as saying, well, I let people abuse me and use me and so on and so forth. I'm not talking about that. We often run right into that to convince ourselves that this is not the path. There are instances like that, no doubt about it, which we have to protect ourselves. But I'm talking about just the daily, day-to-day things with people with whom we live and the way we work and the way we just act towards one another, so much out of fear, false pride, I'm better than you, and so, all those kinds of things. So when some of these are old wounds, I use the example, I never feel like I fit in. An old wound, I didn't feel like I fit in when I was little. I was bullied or something like that. But some of these old wounds, as we grow up, affect the way we relate to one another. So I use the example of then the other person must be wrong. And I'm better than them. And that's why I don't fit in with them. They're weird and I'm not. And in a sense, we resist growing up because the God of His love is growing up, growing into this new way of seeing things. And we end up sometimes being self-centered and self-absorbed. So fear and shame are just a lot of obsession with the self. And we're challenged to drop these outer garments. So the contemplative gaze is not just the same as looking at Jesus on the cross. That's a gaze. And it's a powerful gaze in my tradition. It's called cataphatic. That is looking at one image so your mind isn't so scattered. So you can look at a cross, but it's not the contemplative gaze because you're thinking about things, you're feeling things, you've got images in your mind. It's powerful and it's growth-oriented, but there's something deeper. At some point you stop looking so consciously at the cross. Maybe you close your eyes, maybe you don't. And you see through it. That's the orthodox way of looking at icons. You see through them. And you begin to gaze on Christ, gazing at me in the depth. As a thought, and then it goes deeper than a thought. And what happens is time passes. And you open your eyes and say, oh, what was going on there? But a little bit of change has taken place in you. And you'll see it little by little in the way you respond to the world around you. God made the world with differences. That's obvious. There's differences. Difference is not a problem. What's a problem is when we look at differences out of fear, out of woundedness, out of shame, out of guilt, out of false pride. Because if God made the world with differences, why do we use so much energy trying to fit in? And I mean by fitting in, not that we cooperate, but I got to be like. I want to be like you. Because then I feel I'm accepted. I think about this in terms of how we dress. Now, I was down in Mexico and looking at these middle class and upper middle class women dressed. I was looking at the men too, so don't. I'm broken and imperfect. Any case, and I'm looking at them and I say, oh, these aren't the people who come to the United States. They do, but they fly directly to Vail and they ski. But they dress just like women in Boulder. Because the clothes aren't made in Mexico and they're not made in Boulder. They're made over in Singapore or whatever. And they're not over there knitting away on their machine saying, oh, we're making these clothes for a white person in Boulder or for a Mexican person in Guadalajara. They're just making pants. But we, culturally, have all decided to look a certain way, no matter where we are. And fashion designers are trying to change the fashion. That's, economically maybe a good thing. But by and large, we're all trying to look the same way for some reason. So we struggle to fit in, to be liked. And that's what the whole consumer business is about, I think. But there are differences. We are different. And that's okay if God made, but we're not unique. That can be ununique. Yes and no. When you're unique, as in you suffer from the addiction of uniqueness, you're better than. Then you try to look like other unique people. You go down on the mall and you see all these young people dressed in black with all their tattoos and their rings all over themselves. And they're unique, but they're not unique to one another. So there's always this sense of fitting in. Did Francis of Assisi try to fit in? I don't think so. And people had problems with that. But he was trying to be Francis. but he didn't have problems with them. So there's differences, and we see this in prayers. There are different prayers for different personalities. Even within my tradition, there's all kinds of different ways to pray. So if somebody comes running up to me, well, not running, but hobbling or whatever, however they got there, and they say, Father, Father, yes, yes, yes. Have you seen the novena to the perpetual arm of Jesus? And I said, no, I haven't seen. Oh, it's the best. It's the best novena there is. You've got to read this, Father. It's so wonderful. You'll be a better person. You see that? I'm okay doing what I do. How about being a contemplative? No, I'm not interested in that nonsense. So, that's where we're different. This works for you. Enjoy your perpetual arm of Jesus. It helps you. You're enthusiastic. You actually talk to someone else about God and such. But it's not everybody needs to be just like you. And nor does anybody need to be just like me. I'm simply offering it because a lot of different people have found a connection through it, and I have myself. So there's different prayers for different personalities. And you find what works for you at that particular time in your life. I'm suggesting that possibly also in your personality there's a growth into and through your prayer. So you're saying the novena, and at some point you have an urge, as I've said over and over again, to be still and stop reading and stop thinking and emoting and just sit quietly. But you resist it because you have to finish your novena, because at the end it says you get something for it. That's okay. That's fine. I never debate with people about that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just that it's not fully grown spiritually. But for me to say it's adolescent would be a judgment. It's not my job. It's just to suggest that there's more. And that nudge to stop is God working through your novena to suggest that you just be. God will adjust to where you are. It's a matter of, will you adjust to where God is working in you? And a lot of people simply will not. So whatever prayer works that helps you to feel connected to God is appealing to you in that part of yourself. I'm saying there's something deeper. And God will suggest it sometimes when it just says, why don't you be still and know that I am God? It's in one of the Psalms. So what we're trying to be is what God made us to be. When people make up resumes, for instance, and you can ask yourself, here's another way of looking at it. What's the passion in your life? Well, a lot of people make up resumes to get jobs. In other words, they try to think, well, what does this person want me to be? And it may not be my passion. But my passion at this time will not pay my bills. Just know that it's not your passion. And that you have to find time for your passion. So people do certain things, but what their passion is painting. And you don't have to apologize for it or whatever. It's your passion. So a job is not necessarily your life. And a job is not necessarily who you are in your depth. But you can still do the job. But know that there's more to you than that. A job is not to be completely fulfilling. I'm reading a book. I can't say the word out loud, but it's BS Jobs. But it's spelled out. And one of the BS jobs is a corporate lawyer. But really, a lot of I didn't know that. I thought all corporate lawyers were important. They said, no, that a lot of BS jobs. Those jobs don't need to be. I said, well, I'm not a lawyer and I don't work in a corporation. But he says, yeah, it's a lot of waste of time. And then they talked to corporate lawyers and they said, yeah, we have BS jobs. So, but I said, okay, so whatever. I don't think mine is that, what I do. But just to know that the depths of ourselves will never be discovered or fulfilled in what we do for a living. And so developing a sense of, and when you're in that situation of work, there is a sense of maybe a lack of freedom. But what's that? To be you. To be fully you. So we are trying to find a way for many of us to pay the bills, if you're working out there doing that kind of thing, and yet at the same time saying, what is God calling me to be more fully? God's not necessarily calling me to drop my job. Now, maybe in some cases it is. We just celebrated the feast of St. St. Anthony, not the one who looks for lost things, the monk. And he went out, he had a lot of money, and he heard the gospel like Francis, and it said, sell all you have. And that hit him as, yeah, that's speaking to me. That's what he said. He didn't say it was speaking to everybody. He was not into judgments. He said it was speaking to me. Sold all he had except what he kept to take care of his sister. And then he went off and lived in the desert trying to figure out how to be one with God. So to be you in the face of expectations. I expect a lot of people around. I thought he was really weird. When Keating said he wanted to be a monk, his father wasn't too happy about that. His father wanted him to be a corporate lawyer. But it wasn't big corporate. It was his own business. He was mercantile. Did a lot of shipping law. And Keating's grandfather started it. Keating's father followed it. He wanted to pass the business on to his son. And Thomas didn't want that. He wanted to be a Trappist monk. I mean, really weird. His grandmother gave some support for this, which was, his father's mom, who's kicking his butt. Leave my grandson alone. So, so Keating went off in that direction. So what you're trying to do, and then even then, as a Trappist, he was finding, like Thomas Merton, that these guys weren't contemplatives, like he thought they were supposed to be. They were saying a lot of prayers. They were doing Stations of the Cross and saying rosaries and singing psalms in choir, which was part of the tradition, but they had lost the contemplative dimension. And so Keating, as an abbot, as a personal monk, he tried to practice that while doing the singing in the choir and all, and tried to put in the extra to practice contemplative prayer as he was hearing about it, reading about it. So there's an effort to extend what we do into the contemplative dimension so that we can be all God's calling us to be. And some of us, I think, are being called to be that contemplative person. So freedom is to be you in the face of expectations from others. And as a contemplative, you'll begin to live and let live with people who expect you to be others. I think there's 110 Paulists. I think I know 3, including myself, who actually pursue contemplative prayer. We're activists. All right, here's one. Dave Dwyer. He's a Paulist priest. Dave Dwyer comes out here every year, and he hits people up for money. He does a mass out at the Clouds, I think. And because he used to work up here at Thomas Aquinas. He's a Paulist. He is an important person in the Paulist Fathers. He does media ministry on satellite radio. We have a studio in New York City at our mother house, as well as he works in another studio. He does a lot of interviews. He's on several hours a day, 5 days a week. He's very good at it. He's quick. He's funny. He's insightful. He's got all this giftedness, and I think it's wonderful that he does that. But it's not me. So I'm not jealous of Dave Dwyer. And Dave Dwyer isn't jealous of me. Probably, I may not even know, what do I do? It's not important. It's not important that the Paulist Fathers are more into that kind of out there. And I did a lot of that kind of stuff. I had a radio show in Boulder when I was first up at Thomas Aquinas for a couple of years on one of the local stations. The woman who owned the station was Catholic, and it was 15 minutes of interviews. And that's how I got to know Keating, because I asked him if I could interview him. I'd met him here in Boulder at the Naropa Buddhist Christian Dialogue. And there's a place where people are coming together trying to understand one another and finding out we both had a contemplative dimension of our spiritual paths. And that's what brought us together, to meditate together. So I asked if I could interview him, because I could do a series of interviews. I could do it remotely with this microphone system I had, and recorder. And so I went up to the monastery, did several interviews with him. That's how I found the monastery. That's how I really got to know Thomas Keating in the beginning. So I did that kind of stuff for a while, and it was fine. And then I said, okay, did that, been there, and I'm moving on to some other things. So there's lots of things I did at different times that made sense in those times. But I don't want to do them anymore. It's not that they weren't important. It's not the direction that I think God is taking me. So I think that's what you see. Things are important, and they still have meaning. They're just not where you are called to be now. It's where you were. That's how you see the growth. It's not that we have to put down things to make us feel better about where we are. So, fortunately, I belong to a religious order that lets me do. That's part of the Paulist thing. What do you want to do to live out our sort of evangelization, our ecumenism, and our interfaith work in the Paulist, as we see the gospel? How are you going to express the gospel in the world? And you do it different times over the course of your life. And now I'm doing this. Maybe at some point God just hits me on that and says, okay, shut up. I want you to be a hermit, go to the monastery, never come back. And you'll suffer for it. So do you please people? Is your actions pleasing people for affection or esteem? You know, early on, I think in my priesthood, I was young and I was not finished. I'm certainly not finished now. But I know that there were things I did to please others and for my own self-esteem. You know, when you do a lot of public ministries that have a lot of obvious results, you get a lot of esteem. I ran a baby baptism program at St. Thomas Aquinas, in which we had the couples who wanted babies baptized come together for 4 weeks. And we had 4 couples teaching each week. And then those couples with the babies or about to have a baby would gather in small groups, and they would share faith issues or talk about faith issues. And they would get to meet other people who were like them, young parents or about to be parents. And it was great. And then, you have a lot of experience of results. But, I don't know the results of you. I don't know what you're doing, after you go home and say, God, this guy's really weird. Or it works, I don't know, but that's no longer important to me. I don't have to see the results. So I don't have to work. I'm not as interested in whether I get esteem, whether I look good. But there was a time. And I'm not saying but if I stop being a contemplative, I'll get very competitive about that. For instance, there's a flyer over here. The next workshop is March 30th. That's 2 days after my birthday. Now, if I'm not spiritually evolved, and you come March 30th, and there's no treats for my birthday, I will take you off my prayer list. But if I'm spiritually evolved and you completely ignore the fact that I'm still here, it won't bother me one way or the other. I will love you because God is love. It just depends. I don't know how I'm going to be that day. But March 28th is my birthday. So with that, so you can think about it for a little while, we'll take a break.
Excellent. You described. I feel like it's bold. We know for me, it describes God better than any description ever. Yes, exactly.
You tell a child God is love. Well, the kid is going to watch it. So why don't I just be loved? So it said he changed. The trouble is we tend to have the children is still up. It's a little started before that it was all